Here we are in the tutorial of this course where we're going to dive finally into machine learning. We're going to do an intro to machine learning and the lessons on the Kaggle course platform that allow us to get an introduction to that. If I zoom over to the section of intro to machine learning, you'll notice that there are 7 lessons. The first and the last lesson are quite short. We'll dive into the first 2 lessons today to get a sense of how models work and how we can explore data using the Pandas library to get a sense of the way to start setting up our first machine learning model. In the first lesson, it's a lot of text. The designer of this tutorial has really spent a lot of time creating the narrative to help you understand the scenario that they're trying to use to teach this first modeling effort. I'm not obviously going to read this to you, so you can read it in detail. I'll try to give a high-level overview as I go through this first lesson, as well as the data exploration lesson coming up. The context here is a real estate scenario where you're given a data set of home purchases, and you want to try to predict what attributes, you want to basically predict the home price of new homes that come on your radar as a real estate speculator, and you want to try to be able to predict how much a home will actually sell for based on the characteristics of that home. So it's a pretty practical machine learning approach, and there's a data set that's available in the next couple notebooks, which we'll look at. They introduce the concept of machine learning in a very simple way. One of the most common ways of developing a model is something called a decision tree. Decision trees are really powerful, mostly because they work well on a lot of different types of data, but also because they're human interpretable, at least in the form that we're seeing here. So here's an example of an attribute about a home. Does the home have more than 2 bedrooms or less than 2 bedrooms? So yes versus no. So yes, the predicted price is 188,000. If no, the predicted price is 178,000. So this is a very simple decision tree. And the text here is basically saying the first step in a machine learning process is to basically create a tree like this using what's called a training data set. You're using a large number of historical values of homes that have been sold that have the input variable of number of bedrooms to train the model to understand basically what these 2 numbers are. Essentially, what are these cutoffs, or what is the average of homes that have 2 bedrooms versus not 2 bedrooms? As the data comes in, this is what is called training data comes in. Here's a situation where you have 2 different trees, and they're asking you, what is the most likely result? What is the best fit tree? And does a tree have more than 2 bedrooms? Yes, lower price versus higher price. The second decision tree is probably not as likely as the first decision tree. So you're using human logic right now to understand how trees are, as a machine learning model, are trained. But in Python and Pandas and the libraries that we'll use, this is done automatically using the training data in a step called training the model, basically. One thing that this first notebook also tries to show you is that decision trees can go into have deeper trees that have more splits. So does a house have more than 2 bedrooms? Does it have a lot size that's greater or less than 8,500 versus 1,150 square feet? And then you have another layer of predicted prices. So there are different splits, and in the machine learning models that will do that Python or scikit-learn and Python and these different libraries do is obviously going to be much more complicated than even this. It's going to end up with hundreds of trees with thousands of branches and like different levels of depth in certain ways. If we hop over to the next notebook, which is basically lesson 2, we're going to use pandas and not very complex pandas functions to begin with to look at the data set that we'll be using in this series of lessons. So of course we import pandas. We're going to import a data set from Australia, from Melbourne, Australia, that has home prices from, I think, about 1,300 total homes. We've loaded the data set with read CSV, very simple read CSV, and then we use the .describe function, which you might remember from some of the previous lessons. The .describe function is going to give an understanding of the different statistical indicators of this data set. You can see the mean, the standard deviation, minimum, maximum, the quantiles in between. This data description, there's a little blurb here about how to use this data description to get a sense of the ranges essentially and the values that in these different fields. This data set has, it looks like 15 or 20 different columns or fields that are characteristics about these individual homes. Price is obviously the most important because that's what we're most interested in predicting. This kind of sets us up nicely. If you look through, you can go into more detail, but this sets us up nicely for the next lesson, which focuses on prediction. So of course there is a coding exercise to explore the data set more to solidify this understanding.